Hello everyone, today we've got an extremely educational video lined up for you about XRP, and now couldn't be a better time to drop content like this, certainly given a lot of the misunderstanding and the lack of understanding that I'm seeing out there on social media in regards to what XRP actually is and what it's trying to do. A lot of people are comparing XRP and Chainlink, which they're not really comparable in any which way, and people are obviously very concerned about Swift announcing their own blockchain-based ledger. They're not even at the prototype phase for that yet. And even if Swift are to implement a ledger that they can put stablecoins on and do tokenization with, it really doesn't eradicate XRP's use case, which is really where we're going to start. We're going to be looking at a video that featured Dilip Rao, who worked at Ripple for nearly 6 years. He was the global head of infrastructure innovation. As in this role, he led Ripple's engagement with central banks and financial market infrastructures in their digital journey with distributed ledger technology. Now, XRP is exceptionally unique in regards to what it is and what it's trying to do. It is really the only crypto that's trying to be a bridge currency and ultimately solve the problem of dormant capital in pre-funded accounts that enable global transactions. It's trying to be that intermediary, that piece of technology that fundamentally shakes up how money is moved around the globe. And in doing so, spawn the internet of value. What I want to do is actually look at what Dilip has to say about XRP and the problems that it's solving. And hopefully in doing that, you realize just how unique it is. And XRP is an all or nothing bet for me. It's either going to be adopted and do very well and play that role as on-demand liquidity or a bridge asset, or it's essentially going to lose to its competitors. I think it's going to do well due to its positioning. We'll talk about who they're working with, like Santander, that he sort of talks about a little bit, and central banks. You know, XRP is actively, or Ripple as a company is actively working with central banks around the world, and nations across the world are all now trying to embrace this technology. I think XRP is going to level the playing field for many of them. It's going to shake up the entire banking industry. And I think with that, it does very well. Let's listen to what Dilip actually has to say about XRP and the problems that it's solving. These are colossal problems. Let's dive into this.
The second part of it is going to be, how do we use a digital asset? And that solves the second problem, which is of liquidity. So when a bank wants to make a payment in Turkey, somebody has to have the money in Turkey to deliver. The German bank may not have that. So what they will often do is have an account at the correspondent bank where they're holding Turkish lira. So they're holding money in probably 20, 30, 40, 50 countries around the world for these payments to be made. Altogether, there's about $27 trillion being held in these so-called nostro-vostro accounts around the world. Now, if one bank is holding in 100 different currencies, as you can imagine, that's an expensive exercise. So small banks can't do that in many countries because they don't have the balance sheet for it. So using a digital asset like XRP, which is the asset native to the Ripple ledger, a bank could, for example, just hold XRP. And whenever they wanted Turkish lira, they could buy it from somebody by exchanging XRP for it. Or if they wanted euros, they could buy euros. So if you only had to use one asset, which is instantly translatable into 20, then typically it means you have to hold less money overall. So it optimizes for liquidity. It makes it feasible to exchange instantly and settle using a digital asset that has no counterparty risk. So the elimination of nostros is one use case.
I actually couldn't wait to make this video because I think a lot of people don't understand that that's actually kind of what XRP is designed to do. It's designed to fundamentally shake up the banking sector. What you see is the cryptocurrency space mimicking the banking sector, but taking out the banks, implementing crypto, smart contracts in its replacement. But even if you look at how a DEX operates, you still need to fund in the form of liquidity pools, which actually DeFi does it better than banks because it provides better opportunity or yield to through LP tokens and things like this to participants of liquidity. But you still need to have liquidity in multiple different currencies. Often you need both sides of things. I know some have sort of made it so you only need one. with XRP, it actually eradicates any kind of pre-funding. And essentially in doing so, will completely modernize the banking sector. So we've looked at that from a kind of liquidity point of view. That's kind of what XRP is providing, and there's lots of benefits to that. Certainly if it's globally adopted, it's going to be huge. It's going to have a colossal multi-trillion-dollar market cap, in my opinion, to enable that. But there is the kind of bridge currency side of things, which we're going to listen to him talk about. And then we've got 2 more clips to get into that are very interesting, talking about how central banks are leveraging XRP and the XRP ledger today. And this is an old interview, but one that we really wanted to share. Let's dive into the bridge asset side of things.
It is as a bridge currency. So today where you have pairs of currency which is not very liquid, you might have to go through US dollars, which means that every time Mr. Trump tweets, your transaction is getting affected because the US dollar might go up and down. Whereas if you had ultimately a digital asset that had no counterparty risk, there was no central bank running it, it meant that you'd have a very neutral bridging currency. So that's kind of our second solution. But it's early days in the digital asset space. It's a completely new asset class. Obviously, there's a lot of speculation, so there's a lot of volatility. And volatility is not good for that industry. So we are helping at this stage to create more liquidity using XRP. And ultimately, it'll take some time before financial institutions start to use that, which will then solve both the problems of atomicity of transactions, which gives you 24/7 speed and certainty of settlement, but also the use of a digital asset for liquidity management, which then solves the problem of how much money do I need to have to be able to make all these payments around the world.
XRP is revolutionary. The more I go down the XRP rabbit hole and learn about it, whether that was its inception as open coin backed by Thiel, who's been a very successful investor, certainly revolutionized money via PayPal once, and we've done videos on that, or whether it's what Chris has to say in the early days, whether it's the progression it's seen, whether it's this random lawsuit that specifically targeted XRP and didn't go after any other cryptos, I think really clearing the way for it. The more I go down the XRP rabbit hole, the more unbelievably bullish I just get. This is an all or nothing play for me. And I think it's going to succeed. And actually, what he spoke about there was kind of almost replacing the dollar as that intermediary for global commerce, as the dollar is the world reserve currency. I do think the dollar is going to lose that status, or not lose it. It'll still be probably the dominant currency in terms of volumes. But you don't need it with something like XRP. And I think XRP could actually be signaling the breakdown of the channel that we've seen since 2008 that the dollar's been in. I think other currencies are going to move against it. And that's because I think the dollar essentially, you're not going to need that. You're not going to need one world reserve currency. You just need a bit of technology like XRP that can essentially fundamentally shake up the whole system and allow for any currency to be used in that manner, or XRP to replace it as a neutral kind of leveler, as it were, for nations. Let's dive in, and there's great benefits to nations through choosing a model like that, taking power back. I'll do a longer video on this concept. It's a very interesting one. Let's now dive into what Dilip has to say in regards to Santander and what they're doing, and more broadly banks and the adoption that we're seeing. Let's get into this.
Or do pilots, they want to see everybody else doing it before they jump in. But now, for example, Santander has, this quarter, released an app which is being used in 4 countries, in Spain, in Brazil, in Poland, and the UK. Now, Santander is a big $1 trillion Spanish bank, and they've taken, a while to get there, but now they're going all out to say, using the Ripple technology, we can deliver for you in all of these countries cross-border payments within seconds, which ultimately that's going to be a competitive advantage, for them. Once that kind of thing happens, every other bank says, right, I got to do that. So that starts to now get more and more banks, signed up. So the last, I've been with Ripple now since the middle of 2014. I spent the last few years basically running the Asia Pacific and MENA business, for Ripple. I've just changed hats this year, and now I'm beginning to work with central banks and with financial market infrastructures. Not to educate them, because we've already been doing that for several years, but to actually have them using our technology to solve problems. Because we think you can learn by doing. And I think that if regulators start to get more comfortable with, what are the goods and bads, how does this work, how does this not work, what are some limitations, then I think there'll be a whole acceptance of this technology by the financial ecosystem.
We know Ripple's been working with central banks. There's something very interesting that he talks about in regards to actually a kind of test being done with using XRP and the feedback given. This technology isn't just going to get adopted because it's cool. It's going to get adopted because it fundamentally solves issues and will create a more competitive playing field to banking. It's going to even the scoreboard, as it were, because people can utilize XRP. They don't have to utilize their competitors, which is why I actually think Ripple as a company is very well positioned against Swift. Not everybody wants to use Swift that's owned by their largest competitors, that they have to essentially get taxed from via these Nostro-Vostro accounts and correspondent banking. Utilizing XRP as this kind of bridge source of liquidity for global remittances, this kind of enabler of the Internet of Value, is a very exciting prospect, believe you me, for a lot of smaller banks out there and competitors to some of the large banks that own Swift. Right now, they're forced to use their competitors. Ripple's coming along and saying, look, we've got this technology. It's going to allow you to do this, like solve some of the problems we spoke about at the start. It's going to revolutionize your business model. It's going to mean that you don't have to use them. You can use us. And in doing so, make you far more competitive as a bank. Now, that just doesn't apply to sort of private banks. It also applies to the likes of central banks to compete in that national kind of order of things. Let's dive into another clip of Dilip and what he has to say in regards to pilots that have been done and things that have been done and the response from banks and where we're kind of at. This stuff takes time. Ripple has been doing an amazing job. They're going to continue to do so, I think. And actually, I think they're going to be successful. And that's why I'm in XRP. Let's dive into this last clip.
Price is going to be delivered at, what are the FX rates involved, and being able to synchronize all of those, using our product. So we're still in the early stages. In that model, the MSB doesn't have to hold any XRP. So the exchange is taking the risk of holding XRP and the volatility of that. And that's the starting point. And you have to think about this is brand new territory. Nobody has done this ever. So you have to take baby steps and get everybody comfortable, with it. We're doing retail remittances to start. Why? There's low value, because the liquidity is not deep in these markets. So if somebody wanted to do a corporate transaction, that's immediately like $10, $100 million. There's not enough liquidity for it. So banks will watch that and say, right, how's that going? And is that cheaper? Is it faster? Is it better? Because banks want somebody else to try it out and say, okay, that works. Maybe now we'll jump in. Actually, back in 2016, we did a project with 12 banks to use XRP between themselves, just as a technical trial. They loved it. It didn't work. They said, okay, instead of having a multiplicity of account relationships that we have to have with each other, 12 banks would have had to have 144 relationships with each other. They just used XRP and moved it between each other and said, this works. So they've already tried that out. And we know that that's the holy grail. But they will take time to get there. And regulators also have to feel comfortable. The volatility has to come down, as I mentioned. Markets have to get deeper. This just takes time.
I have goosebumps just making this video. Ladies and gentlemen, that is it from me. Hope you enjoyed this one as much as I enjoyed presenting it. Hopefully, I think most people certainly that watch this channel will know kind of XRP's role, but there's people making all sorts of comparisons between XRP and other cryptos. Let me tell you, XRP has one of the most unique use cases in the entire cryptocurrency space. Coins are almost alt to it. They're almost altcoins to XRP in the same way, altcoins are to Bitcoin. It really is on that kind of uniqueness in regards to what Bitcoin's trying to do as a store of value. It's no longer a currency, in my opinion. XRP is kind of doing this real special thing, and I think it's going to be successful in that. That's it from me, guys. I'm going to love and leave you all. Thanks for watching. See you in the next.